are 400,000 textual variations of the Bible, the New Testament.
Variants are actually very important in preserving the scriptures. Because we have variants, we can see when someone comes along and tries to change something. The textual variants actually give us confidence in that the scriptures are preserved. This is unlike the Quran, which was standardized many years ago, and because of that, they got rid of many textual variants. So Muslims can't actually know if they have the right Quran because many of the variants have been done away with.
4,000 textual variances is a big claim, but it's actually 5,000 textual variances. And with that, not one is an eyewitness account of what Jesus said or did, or Paul either. Now, the big bold claim that Muslims had their variations took. Well, the one thing that you can't take away from a Muslim is a Muslim, from the very beginning, they have always recited the Quran.
None of the authors, and I mean none of the authors of the New Testament met Jesus.
So this is something that's debated among modern scholars. However, all the earliest evidence we have from the early church and the church fathers points to many of the books of the New Testament being written by people who knew Jesus, including his own brothers. The problem for the Muslim is that this is a double standard because the author of the Quran never met Jesus. So by this logic, everything the Quran says about Jesus is not trustworthy because it was written 600 years after Jesus' life by someone who never met him.
Out of the doubt, we know not one author in the New Testament. Now, the one thing that we do know is when we say that Matthew is wrote by Matthew and Mark is wrote by Mark, those are assumptions. And we are assuming. There is nothing stated there. There's no fact to that. And what even kills it worse is that the books that we can hold in the New Testament with our hand, that we come from the 2nd and 3rd century. Now, from the Islamic standpoint, the person that said that they have met Jesus was the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon them both. And from the Christian perspective, you have a number of people claiming that they met Jesus. But in those stories that, from the Christian perspective, that met Jesus, those stories come from the 2nd and 3rd century, no eyewitness account. Now, from the Quran's perspective, what we do have is the Quran. The Quran is laid out to show that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is in fact a prophet.
We know, history tells us that the church changed the Bible. It's a fact.
Once again, because of textual variants, the scriptures are actually guarded from this. For example, we see at the end of Mark that the last 11 verses were not in the earliest manuscripts. But the reason why you may find them in a lot of Bibles is because they don't actually affect the theology of Christianity.
We have a prime example of the early church changing the Bible, and we can go to John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. It's the woman that committed adultery. It is an added story. When we look at Papyrus 66, dated around 200 AD, we see that it's not there. But we do see in the 5th century that it is added into the Bible. So when you say these variances help you understand and help you solidify the authenticity of the Gospels, and it's actually proven you wrong, in this case especially. Now, that does change the theology of Christianity because that story in itself, the woman that committed adultery, is a very well-known story.